All right, we're back to our series Across the Bar. We're here with Walter, who will be playing Callum,
Callum Goldshield.
Callum Goldshield. And Callum's drink that we chose to go with is red wine. And why do we go with red wine?
Because Callum is a priest. Well, he's sort of a warrior priest, Templar type. But sacramental wine would be his identifiable drink.
Nice. Cheers. Good sacrament. So Cal, I think out of all the characters in this campaign, I think is the most unique in the fact that he is not he's not necessarily from this world or tied to something that happened historically here. He's really an outsider. So tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what's your backstory?
So Callum was, and we've already seen a little bit of this in the Prelude campaign, right? There is a Star Republic out there, and Callum is a member of that. And while he's not one of the Watcher Paladin warriors who actually leads the forces, he's more like I said, a warrior priest, chaplain, spiritual leader type military attaché. And so his detachment was then fighting some eldritch, elder, ancient evil in space, and the battle was a success. The being was defeated. Demos was its name, but Callum's crew and ship killed and destroyed, and he ended up being rescued by the Archangel Jonathan. And Jonathan then sends Cal to this world here, to Saladia, and gives him an objective. Says, I have saved your life, and for that, I expect you to do this. And so that's how he ends up being a part of this upcoming adventure.
Nice. So, yeah, I like the tie into the Star Republic, like you mentioned. So Jonathan is going to serve as an emissary to what's called the Celestial Hebdomad, which is a group of archangels that rule Celestia. So he put you here. So what was the objective when he said, "Hey, you're going to come to Sladia"?
So, according to Jonathan, there have been a number of attempts to go after this evil organization, which we'll learn more about that as the curtain rises. But attempts to go after them thus far have met with defeat by the individuals sent after them being corrupted by that organization. And this is particularly troubling when we talk about the fact that several of the operatives sent after that organization were, in fact, celestials, angels themselves, and they were not beyond its reach. But Callum, as I mentioned, his entire crew fell subject to the influence of Demos, right? To the point where some of them even rose and fought other members of the crew as zombies under the influence of its necromantic field. But Callum was the only member of his crew who was unaffected at all, top to bottom, start to finish, front to back, lock, stock, and barrel by these influences. And so Jonathan in him sees a potential, if confusingly, protected, immune, inoculated, whatever being that may be beyond the reach of this corrupting influence. And so if he was strong enough to survive the grasp of Demos, then perhaps he would be strong enough to withstand the influence of this evil.
Nice, awesome. That ties in very nicely, and that's yeah. To your point, a lot of the history of this campaign universe has been devil pacts. Like there's literally a war called the Faustian War that was fought over the leader of a large country making a devil pact. Fallen angels, a lot of things that have been corrupt. So it makes a lot of sense.
We've also seen a lot of angels that are just dumb, lawful, stupid.
Yeah, demons are evil and angels are dicks. So let's talk about how does that translate into an actual background from the game.
Okay, so we used a Spelljammer campaign specific background with only a very slight modification. So he got the, I believe it's Wild Spacer background as a template. Right. But then because Jonathan, as an archangel, his theme is based on the use of shields rather than getting the tough feat, which is a pretty good feat. We're not sneezing at the tough feat here. Strong feat. 2 extra points per level adds up. But instead we took shield training, which granted his class already gives him shield proficiency, but some of the other little tips and tricks and tidbits and bonuses coming from shield training, like being able to draw your shield rapidly. So when having been blessed by the Archangel Jonathan, when Callum draws his shield, he doesn't, reach back, pull it out, strap it on, and secure it, right? It just floats onto his arm and he's ready to go because Jonathan has offered upon him a blessing. And so that's kind of like his background type thing. And he calls himself now Callum Goldshield because of the shield gifted to him by Jonathan, which is how he learned this trick, using that shield.
Nice.
And so we used Twilight Cleric as far as the rules are concerned, because he's a cleric of the stars, Starlight, Twilight, pretty close. And so he sees himself as a spiritual leader, advisor, protector of the souls of those around him. And so eventually when he gets like the star field, Twilight field ability thing, like that will thematically make sense. Starting from the very first level, he's going to be using the guidance cantrip a lot, just to like, protect people. He has the mantra that he says, like, stars guide you, shield protect you. That's kind of his thing, is he's there, he supports you, he protects his team. He has tremendous survivor's guilt for being the only person who made it off of his ship alive, and indeed even the ship didn't make it, right? And he feels like he needs to do a better job moving forward of being the guardian of those around him, not purely in a physical sense, certainly, but also in a physical sense.
So this is a nice segue. So I think you were raised in the Star Republic,
right?
And then this event, this big traumatic event that happened, clearly it's going to shape a lot of the things for your character. So let's start going through that with ideals. So what are some ideals that you came up with?
So okay, as a member of the Star Republic, just based on what the Star Republic is, right? Like, he believes in meritocracy, he believes credit where credit is due, he believes that recognition, reputation, these things have not only power but also meaning, that they are valuable, that like deeds unsung are, deeds that don't count. And it's like you need to be recognized for what you do, because that's the way that the Star Republic kind of works. Is like, if you go unrecognized, then you cannot progress and advance, right? And so like he keeps a very, like, also having been a shipboard member of a crew, right? He keeps a very careful log this way and that way. He believes that contracts, oaths, deals, and promises are extraordinarily important. This is like, again, this is kind of like a Star Republic thing, right? Like you make a pledge, you stick to it. But it's also like, he's a lawful character and those things are important to him. And he feels like he kind of owes back to the concept of karma based on like his job was to protect these people and he failed, and he has a lot of debts to pay back for that. He believes in freedom, but he believes on it at a sort of a societal, structural level. So, like, we likened this to the idea of a sort of non-interference dictum, that, like, if a society is run in a way with which you disagree, the idea of being the freedom fighter who comes in, like, we talked about the chaotic good, like, liberationist coming in and throwing off the shackles of that civilization, whereas Callum's position would be like, those people have chosen to live in this way. You are not entitled externally to come in and overturn their society's standards and government because you don't agree with it. You don't get to make that choice. Like, that's his concept of freedom, and he believes in that concept of freedom strongly. And being a member of the Star Republic, of course, he thinks that adventure itself, and adventuring in the Dungeons and Dragons sense of it, is a worthy pursuit. It's something that brings value to the world. It makes the things a better place, right? Like going forth, slaying monsters, damsels in distress, all of that stuff. It's like the world should be built around pursuit of that, and that's what the Star Republic is, right? Because it's a unifying, I don't want to say country, but a state that was created by adventurers around the concept of adventuring through the stars in this case.
Nice. That's awesome, and those will all be some unique, cool things to go ahead and roleplay with. What about the bond? So what persons or organizations?
Well, we've talked about this a lot, right, so far. Never leave a man behind, right? Like, he feels like he messed that one up, even if he didn't really hold strongly to that idea before. And as a member of a crew and as a member of a military force, like, he did already have that idea of camaraderie, companionship already in place. But now, with his survivor's guilt, with his unique position as spiritual guardian and advisor to a crew full of people who then all found themselves falling under the sway of necromantic magic, like, he feels like he cannot make that failure again. He's post-traumatic about it. He's not okay with it. He's not okay with himself about it. He really feels like he needs to karmatically right that failure on his part. And so, like, whereas a number of characters, especially like he's a cleric, he's eventually going to be able to resurrect people flat out from the dead. He would have a very difficult time accepting that argument from a fellow adventurer, like, we just need to bug out right now, put ourselves back together, come up, we'll resurrect him, leave him behind, get it straight. Like, it's a very reasonable argument, but he would have a very difficult time seeing it as an acceptable course of action, right? Like, no, cannot leave him here to die. Can't do it.
So talk a lot about how he's shaped by this trauma and his upbringing. How does that manifest itself in terms of a personality flaw?
So, for his flaws, I've talked a little bit about how he might have a difficult time seeing the logic of a sensible retreat and recuperation, particularly when it comes to the idea of even a less meaningful sacrifice and a more symbolic sacrifice. Like, we have magic, we can resurrect this guy tomorrow. It doesn't matter. Like, some of us have to get out of here and straighten this out later. He'd have a hard time with that. That'd be difficult for him. Like, he couldn't see the logic of that. And like, the character is intelligent. The character is like, he has wisdom. He has intelligence. He understands these things, but like, he would have a hard time seeing and appreciating them as genuine truths. As far as flaws go, like, he comes from a structured society. He's a lawful character. He follows orders, right? Like, he was a part of a large navy. He was a military man.
I keep thinking of the line from A Few Good Men. We follow orders or people die. Yeah.
So he will follow an order even if he doesn't agree with it on an ethical level, right? And he will do his best to argue against it, like convince his superiors to maybe do this, that, or the other thing. And he's certainly, like, he is an argumentative individual. He's an ideologist, or an idealist, rather. I guess he's an ideologist, but he's an idealist, and he believes in certain things, and he will, almost crusade for those beliefs in conversation. He's argumentative, certainly, but he believes that authority should be, regarded. But his concept of authority is, like, based on people. The way the Star Republic works is that a single figure of authority is given, like we talked about this in terms of society and freedom and structure, right? A single figure of authority is given pretty much total sovereignty over a planet. They have a Bill of Rights that must be extended to those people, but beyond that, individual massive authority over the planet. And the Star Republic does not interfere with that further. As long as they stay within the bounds set by the Star Republic, they can do whatever they want in there. So he believes in the authority of the individual more so than the specific circumstance. And so if he can convince a person who gave him an order that he followed it, in his mind, he has followed it, right? Because that person believes it, and they are the authority from which that order takes its strength. And so he might then formulate what he considers to be a convincing argument as to why he did is what he was supposed to have done. And if he can sell it, or if he thinks he can sell it, he will either, do it or try to do it according to that interpretation. And so, I mean, if you're a very rigid militaristic structure, you might find that to be a pretty terrific flaw. Arguably, it might be a positive thing in certain lights, and it might be a negative thing in others. But it's his perspective.
Yeah, I like it. It's very like, there's a few things that come to mind, but it's very like, it's like the letter of the law, but not, like, to your point, like, you're not going to, it's not the intent. It's like really what they said, and can you convince them that you followed that thing?
Right. As long as the person accepts it, right?
And I think we talked about how, like, Jonathan, who's your emissary or liaison to the Hebdomad, at this point with
and
this,
certainly as a priest of Starlight who believes in the Celestian stars, actual contact with an angel, he is certainly now a huge figure of authority to Callum.
Yeah, he believes that this area is pretty much far gone. So he might tell you, go in and go scorched earth and Sodom and Gomorrah, this town. And I think you talked about how, like, one of the things that this character will do is try to influence or persuade him that maybe that's not the right approach.
Right. So given that scenario, right, if Jonathan comes to Callum and says, we must all fulfill our sacrament.
Yeah.
Given that specific scenario as an example, right, Jonathan comes in and says, I am fully certain there is taint upon this town. We will destroy everyone in it, and therefore be sure. Callum would disagree with that on an ethical level because he believes in the value of life. Blah, 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 he's a good guy. And he would formulate the argument that's a reasonably good way to be sure, but it's only a good way to be sure of one thing. You handle your knowns directly. You know there's taint there, you get rid of everyone there, you know it's gone. But, for example, your unknown unknowns, if taint has escaped that place and gone on to other places, you lose any opportunity to achieve a lead on it. And so, if you do things more of an espionage flavor, with subtle infiltration and understanding, you will then know whether or not there's other stuff to be done. You can't, like, if you take a sort of snap your fingers lazy destructionist pathway, like you drop the nuke, you're going to miss out on a lot of intelligence gathering that you could have done if you actually took the time and effort to send, I don't know, a guy like me in there to take care of it. And
yeah, I mean, and this might just be based on what I know about some of the influences, but like in that regard, I'm getting like a special forces vibe from this guy. Like I like how you said like cleric, but like warrior cleric,
right,
who's going to have all these other skills and abilities. So,
well, so, I mean, so like I mentioned before, the character does have like a great deal of intelligence, and of course, as a cleric, he's going to have a high wisdom score. He also has a high charisma score. He's he's kind of a brick. He doesn't have any dexterity, but he's balanced across most of the other stats, and he takes a lot of half beats to keep himself well rounded. He does really have sort of a special forces warrior priest vibe thing going on, where like he is rounded enough to go in and do all of that sort of stuff, figure it out, piece it together, and do a lot of rough and tumble and magic stuff to keep himself rolling there. And I mean, he's a wild space astronaut. They even if he doesn't have the toughness feat, like they do have a sort of gritty vibe to them. Yeah, I think a special forces analogy is fairly appropriate.
You mentioned law and you mentioned good a couple times. Is that the alignment you're going with, lawful good?
Character is lawful good.
Nice.
It can be a drag, I am aware, but it's who he is.
Yeah. Last question. So we talked a lot about your background, your influences, how they're going to manifest in different personality traits. But I always like to ask, like, what is your motivation, your why behind adventuring, and what is your ideal future state that you're trying to bring into the world? Like, what are your goals?
Well, I mean, we already talked about a lot of the small stuff already, right? Like, again, he has a couple of debts that he feels he has to repay, right? Jonathan saved his life, and so whatever Jonathan asks of him, both as his savior and then as his savior in another sense, right? As an angel and as a figure of authority to him in general, right? He's going to do what John asks. It's just going to happen. He then feels like he needs to protect the people around him on spiritual and physical level because he feels like he very much failed that before. And then on a sort of broader sense, like this is like a Star Republic thing, he's now on a whole new undiscovered world that nobody in Star Republic has ever heard before, right? They don't know that it exists, but it's very Star Republic appropriate, right? It's full of adventurers. This place just churns them out, and that's the kind of planet that Star Republic would love to have included. And so over time, he is almost inescapably going to find himself drawn towards making this world a member of the Star Republic and finding either, placing himself in a position to become that selected leader with all that authority over the planet, or finding someone appropriate to it and positioning himself near them, right? Because he does believe in the Star Republic ultimately. And so he really wants, to further its interest, and adding member planets to it appropriately would be something that he would do. So he has or will eventually develop a focus on that as a side objective, making this world be part of the Republic.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to playing him. Definitely a lot of thought and passion you can tell that you put into the character. I think he's a really cool character. Like I said, very unique compared to some of the other characters in the group. Since coming from outside this world, so that'll be cool to role play and see how we incorporate that. Thanks for coming across the bar. This has been great, and looking forward to the campaign. Huzzah!
See you there.
See you there.